So, how does it happen? How does an empire that's been around for 600 years, a massive, complex, multi ethnic world, just end? It's the kind of question that sounds like it's pulled from a fantasy novel, right? But this is the real, gritty history of the Ottoman Empire.
And the thing is, the answer isn't a story of some quiet, slow decline. No, the end was violent, it was chaotic, and it was revolutionary. It was a single decade of war, coups, and radical change that literally tore the old world apart and forged the modern Middle East right from its ashes.
So, where do we even begin this story? Well, strangely enough, it starts not with an ending, but with what everybody thought was a brand new, hopeful beginning, the idealistic and, as it turns out, ultimately doomed revolution of 1908.
All right, so let's meet the main players in this whole saga. The Committee of Union and Progress, or the CUP. You probably know them as the Young Turks. Now, these guys weren't your typical old-school politicians. They were young, they were ambitious, and they were fiercely patriotic military men who looked at the old Sultan's regime and just saw corruption and weakness. Their mission? To save the empire by dragging it, kicking and screaming, into the modern world.
And you know what? At first, it worked. I mean, it worked better than anyone could have possibly imagined. The moment the CUP forced the Sultan to bring back the constitution, the entire empire just exploded with joy. For this one brief, shining moment, it really seemed like all the different peoples of the empire, Muslims, Christians, Jews, could actually come together under this new banner of freedom. But, and there's always a but, right? Here's the fatal flaw. See, the Young Turks, they were mostly junior officers, minor officials. They felt like they didn't have the street cred to just take over and govern. So what did they do? They decided to rule from behind the curtain, pulling the strings. And that, right there, is the heart of the problem. They had all the power, but officially, none of the responsibility. That is a recipe for absolute chaos. And well, that decision to be the power behind the throne, it backfired. Big time. All that initial hope and unity, it was about to curdle into a complete nightmare of political violence. It took less than a year for everything to go south. It all kicks off with the assassination of a journalist, which sparks a mutiny by conservative troops right in the capital. But here's the thing about the CUP. They don't back down. They rally their loyal troops, their action army, march on the capital, and violently crush the rebellion. Then they depose the Sultan they never trusted anyway. This was a message. The gloves were officially off. So what was really driving all this chaos? You have to understand it was a massive culture clash inside the army itself. On one side, you had the Mektepli. These were the modern academy-trained officers, the guys in the cup. And on the other, you had the Alaili, the old guard, the soldiers who had come up through the ranks and were loyal to the Sultan. The new guys came in, demoted them, and changed all the rules. So you can imagine what happened next, right? Their resentment just boiled over. So the CUP managed to hang on. But this whole ordeal, it changed them. It left a scar. The big takeaway for them was that idealism, that wasn't going to cut it. Their enemies would stop at nothing. And then a catastrophic military defeat was about to push them over the edge and force them to grab absolute power. 4 million. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many people the empire lost after the Balkan Wars. This wasn't just land. These were the empire's European heartlands, its richest provinces for half a millennium. The psychological shock of losing them, you just can't overstate it. So when the civilian government was about to surrender a key historic city, the hardliners in the CUP just snapped. They'd had it with pulling strings from the background. Led by firebrands like Enver Pasha, they literally stormed the seat of government, shot the Minister of War mid-sentence, and took direct, violent control of the state. And just like that, the whole secret committee thing was done. From this point on, it's all about these three guys, a triumvirate. You've got Enver Pasha, the ambitious war minister, Talat Pasha, the master political operator, and Jamal Pasha, the military governor. Yeah, from 1913 on, these three, they pretty much were the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so now they have total control, and they start this massive, radical new project. It wasn't just about saving the empire anymore. Oh no, it was about tearing it down and rebuilding it from scratch, in their own image as a modern, centralized Turkish nation-state. Now, to back this up, they needed an ideology, right? So they turned to thinkers like Ziya Gökalp. He had this really clever idea. He said, look, there's a difference between civilization, which is international science and tech, and culture, which is the unique Turkish soul.
Basically, we can take Europe's technology without losing who we are. It was the perfect justification for radical but supposedly authentic change.
And this wasn't just some academic theory. It had huge, real-world effects, and fast. They launched a policy they called the national economy. The idea was to build a brand new business class, a Turkish Muslim one. But this wasn't your standard economic plan. This was social engineering, plain and simple, designed to push out the Greek and Armenian families who had been the empire's economic engine for generations. So you've got this aggressive new nationalism brewing, this push to create a single, unified Turkish state. And it's on a collision course with the biggest disaster of the 20th century, World War I. This was the CUP's final all-or-nothing gamble, and it would lead to total collapse. So how on earth did they get into the war? Well, it's a crazy story. Worried they'd be left out in the cold, Enver Pasha makes a secret deal with Germany. Then comes this masterstroke of PR. Germany gifts them 2 state-of-the-art warships. And the final domino? Those same ships, still with German commanders, go and attack Russia, and boom, that's it. They're in the war. And the war starts with just an unbelievable disaster. Enver Pasha himself leads this grand winter offensive against Russia. The result was a place called Sarikamish. And it really wasn't a battle. It was just a tragedy of bad planning and horrific weather. We're talking nearly 80,000 soldiers lost, most of whom simply froze to death, leaving the entire eastern border wide open. So, in the chaos after this disaster, with the Russian army advancing, the CUP government makes a decision that will change history forever. The official story, their public rationale, was that they had to relocate the entire Armenian population from the war zone. It was, they claimed, a military necessity to prevent an uprising. But the historical analysis from our source material paints a very different and much darker picture. It concludes that a secret inner circle of the CUP actually organized a centrally planned policy of extermination, and that the official relocations were basically a cover story for this operation. The human cost of this was just devastating. The source we're looking at estimates that somewhere between 600,000 and 800,000 people died, from massacres, from being force-marched into the Syrian desert with no food or water, and from deliberate, systemic starvation. And at the exact same time, the rest of the empire was just falling apart like dominoes. The Arab revolt kicks off in the south, opening a whole new front. Then Baghdad falls to the British, then Jerusalem. By 1918, the army had basically evaporated, with over 500,000 deserters. The state itself was just a shell. And then, on October 31st, 1918, they signed the armistice. And that was the end. So it all comes back to that first question, doesn't it? The Young Turks started out with this dream of saving their country, a noble one even, but they ended up destroying it through extremism, war, and genocide. And their story leaves us with a really chilling question, one that's still incredibly relevant today. When a nation is in crisis, how do you stop would-be saviors who promise a glorious rebirth, but end up delivering nothing but ruin?